My mother's 60th birthday was the night my father gave my sister a house I paid for. He stood up at the head of the table with a slice of cake still on his plate and a small velvet box in his hand, the kind you'd expect to hold a ring, not a key. The room had that warm, loud, half-drunk energy that big family parties get around 9 o'clock, when the kids have run off to chase each other around the parking lot and the adults have stopped watching the clock. "Lauren," he said, and the table went quiet the way tables do when somebody uses that voice. "Your mother and I have been talking, and we want to do something for you." He opened the box. Inside was a single brass key on a leather fob shaped like a little pine tree, the kind you buy at a Lake Town gift shop for $6. "We're putting the lake house in your name," he said. "Free and clear. Because when things were hardest for this family, you're the one who showed up. That kind of loyalty deserves a home." The room made a sound I can only describe as a collective intake of breath followed by applause. The kind people mean. My mother was already crying, dabbing under her eyes with a paper napkin that had little gold 60s printed on it. She reached for the microphone the DJ had set up for toasts and said, through the tears, "Lauren saved this family." I was sitting 3 seats down, and I was clapping. I want you to understand that. I was clapping. My hands were moving the way hands move at a party, the way hands move when 40 people are watching and every single one of them believes they're witnessing something good. Because here's the thing nobody in that room knew, except my father and me. 2 years earlier, I was the one who paid off that mortgage. $61,400, wired directly to the bank, 3 months before the county would have taken the house at auction. My father asked me to do it, and when it was done, he sent me a text message that I still have, word for word, saved in a conversation thread I never deleted. "Don't tell your mother about this. I'll explain it my way." I didn't ask what my way meant. I trusted him. I was 39 years old, and I still trusted my father the way you trust someone who taught you to ride a bike, without questioning whether the hand on the back of the seat is actually still there. So I sat at that party, clapping, while my mother cried real tears over a lie my father built 2 years before, and my sister accepted a house with my name nowhere on it. This is the story of the 2 years between that text message and the day I finally answered it. It's about a mortgage and a lie and a mother who wasn't the villain I thought she was going to be. It's about a father who loved me and still let me disappear, because disappearing was easier than admitting what it cost him to be saved. But it starts like most things in my family did, on an ordinary Tuesday, with my phone ringing during lunch. My name is Rachel Kessler. I'm 41. I'm a physical therapist, and I own a third of a small clinic in Asheville with my business partner, Marissa, which mostly means I own a third of the headaches and all of the billing software passwords. I've been married to Tom for 14 years. We have 2 kids, Ben and Sophie, 11 and 8, and a house with a mortgage that is entirely boringly in both our names. If you'd asked me before any of this happened to describe my role in my family, I would have said something like, the responsible one. And I would have said it with a small, proud shrug, like it was a compliment I'd earned instead of a job nobody else had applied for. My sister Lauren is 4 years younger than me. Growing up, if something broke, I fixed it. If someone needed to be picked up, I drove. If my parents were fighting about money, which happened more than either of them will admit even now, I was the kid doing the math in her head at the dinner table, converting grocery bills into worry. Lauren got to be the sensitive one. She cried easily and got hugged for it. I didn't cry easily, so nobody thought to ask if I needed a hug in the first place. I'm not telling you this to make her sound spoiled, because she wasn't, not really. She was just a kid the same as I was. But somewhere in there, a rule got written into our family without anyone announcing it out loud. Rachel is fine. Rachel handles things. Lauren needs looking after. 30 years later, that rule was still running the whole show, and none of us had noticed. The Tuesday I'm thinking of, about 2 weeks before my mother's birthday, I was eating a sandwich at my desk between patients when my phone lit up with my dad's name. "Hey, Dad." "Hey, kiddo. You got a minute?" He always asked if I had a minute, and I always said yes, even when I didn't, because saying no to my father felt like something other people were allowed to do. I'm listening, I said, tucking the phone against my shoulder while I typed a note into a patient's chart. It's nothing big, he said, which was what he always said right before it turned out to be something. Just, the truck needs a transmission, and it's gonna run about $1,800, and I was wondering if you could front it till the pension check comes. Sure, Dad. I'll send it tonight. You're a lifesaver. I hung up and kept charting like nothing had happened, because nothing had, not really. This was Tuesday. This was normal. I'd been quietly covering small gaps in my parents' finances for about 6 years by then. A car repair here, a dental bill there, once a roof that couldn't wait for insurance to sort itself out. Lauren didn't know about most of it. My parents didn't exactly advertise it either. It just happened. The way water finds the lowest point in a yard without anyone digging a channel for it. That night over dinner, Marissa, who'd stopped by to drop off a folder of paperwork, watched me put my card into the online banking app at the kitchen table and said, not unkindly, "You know you don't have to be the family ATM, right? It's $1,800 for a transmission," I said. "It's not a big deal." "It's never a big deal," she said. "That's kind of the problem." Tom, at the stove, didn't say anything, but I saw him glance over. He'd said some version of Marissa's line to me more than once, usually more gently, and I'd always given him the same answer. It's just how our family works. Somebody has to be the one who handles things. I didn't know yet that 2 years before that Tuesday, I'd already made the decision that would define this entire story. I didn't know that the truck transmission and the $1,800 were nothing, a warm-up, a habit I'd built so deep I couldn't feel the weight of it anymore. I didn't know that night that I was about to spend a birthday party watching my sister get thanked for something I'd done with money I never talked about, to a bank I never mentioned, on a night 2 years earlier that I want to tell you about now. 2 years before my mother's birthday party, on a Thursday night in March, my father called me sounding like a man reading his own obituary. "Rach," he said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to not tell your mother yet." I remember exactly where I was, standing in my kitchen with a dish towel over my shoulder, half listening for the dryer buzzer. Something in his voice made me put the towel down. "Okay," I said. "What's going on?" "The house," he said. "The lake house. We're behind. Real behind." A pause, and then quieter. 3 months behind. I got a letter from the bank last week. If we don't catch it up, they start the foreclosure process. I sat down at the kitchen table. How far behind, exactly? He told me the number, and then he told me why. An investment he'd made 2 years earlier. A friend from the Rotary Club with a sure thing in a self-storage development that had gone nowhere, taking a chunk of their retirement savings with it. He'd been quietly bleeding money to cover the gap ever since, robbing one account to feed another, and the lake house, the one his own father had built additions onto by hand in the 70s, the one Sunday dinners had happened in for 40 years, was 3 months from an auction notice. "Does Mom know?" I asked. "No," he said fast. "Too fast. And I don't want her to. Not like this. She'll worry herself sick, and it's my fault, Rachel. I did this. I don't want her looking at me different. I want to be honest with you about what I felt in that moment, because it wasn't generosity, not purely. It was fear. It was the specific animal fear of picturing my parents' house, my grandfather's house, with a sheriff's notice stapled to the door. It was 30 years of being the one who fixes things, activated all at once like a reflex. "How much do you need?" I asked, to catch it up completely. "Not patch it. Fix it." He told me. $61,400. I didn't say yes right away. I want that on the record, even now. I asked Tom that night at that same kitchen table, and Tom, who has never once in 14 years told me what to do with my own money, asked me one question. "Is this a loan or a gift?" "I don't know yet," I said. "Find out. Get it in writing. Not because I don't trust your dad. Because you deserve to know what you're actually agreeing to." So I called my father back the next morning and told him I'd do it, on one condition. We'd put something in writing just between the two of us, saying it was a private loan, no interest, repayable whenever he could, no pressure. He agreed immediately, almost gratefully, like the paperwork made it feel less like charity and more like a business arrangement between two adults, which I think is exactly what he needed it to feel like. 3 days later, I wired $61,400 directly to the mortgage servicer. Not to my father's account. Straight to the bank in my name, on a date I can still recite without looking it up, because it's the same date stamped on a framed photograph that hangs in my parents' front hallway to this day. A photo Diane took that same weekend of Frank standing proudly by the mailbox, captioned in her careful cursive. The day we paid off the lake house. She just didn't know which we she was writing about. 20 minutes after the wire went through, my phone buzzed. A text from my dad. Don't tell your mother about this. I'll explain it my way. I remember reading it twice. I remember thinking it was strange, but not alarming. The kind of thing you file away without examining too closely, because examining it would mean asking questions I wasn't ready to ask about my own father. I told myself it was generosity. Pure and simple. I'd saved my family's home, and I didn't need a parade for it. I genuinely believed that. What I didn't understand yet was that I'd just agreed to something bigger than the money. I'd agreed to disappear from my own good deed. And my father, without ever meaning to be cruel about it, was about to build a story on top of my silence that would eventually have nothing to do with me at all. Back to the party. Back to the key, the velvet box, my mother crying into a paper napkin. After the toast, after the applause died down and the DJ put on something people could dance to, I got up to refill my water glass, and a family friend named Carol, my mother's book club friend, sweet, a little nosy, caught my arm at the drink table. "Wasn't that wonderful?" she said, meaning the toast. Then, because Carol has known me since I was in braces and has a memory like a filing cabinet, she added, "Didn't you help out with that house too at some point? I feel like I remember your mom saying something." I opened my mouth to answer honestly, and I genuinely don't know what I would have said, because my mother appeared at my elbow before I could decide, laughing, already halfway into the sentence like she'd rehearsed it. "Oh, Rachel helps everyone with everything," she said, patting my arm. "That's just Rachel." Carol laughed too, the way you laugh at something that sounds like affection. And it did sound like affection. That's the part that took me 2 years to fully understand. My mother wasn't trying to hurt me. She said it the way you'd describe someone's hair color. It's simply a fact about me as far as she knew. Rachel helps. That's just Rachel. I laughed along. I want you to know that I laughed along because that's what I did for most of my life. I made the discomfort smaller so other people didn't have to feel it. But something in me had gone very still. Under the table, a few minutes later, Tom reached over and took my hand. He hadn't heard the exchange with Carol, not the words, but he'd been watching my face across the room, and he knew me well enough to know something had landed wrong. "You okay?" he asked low just for me. "I'm fine," I said, which was the family motto essentially. "I'm fine. Rachel's fine. She handles things." I didn't cry that night. I didn't confront anyone. I drove home with Tom while the kids slept in the back seat, and I stared out the window at the dark shapes of the mountains, and I told myself, the way I'd told myself 100 times before, that it didn't matter. That I knew the truth even if nobody else did. That the money had done its job and the house was safe, and that should be enough. That sentence, "That's just Rachel," would come back to me, word for word, in the last conversation I ever had about that house. But I didn't know that yet. That night, I only knew that something had shifted a few degrees inside my chest, quietly, the way a picture frame goes crooked on a wall, and you don't notice until the light hits it wrong. A week after the party, Lauren posted a photo on social media. It was a picture of the little brass key on the pine tree fob, resting in her open palm against the wood grain of the lake house dock. The caption read, "Grateful my parents see how hard I've shown up for this family. Blessed beyond words." She tagged my mother and my father. She did not tag me. I found it at 11 at night, scrolling in bed while Tom slept beside me. The blue light of the phone the only thing on in the room. I sat with my thumb hovering over the screen and read the comments, one by one, because apparently that's a thing I needed to do to myself that night. 40-some comments. Aunts, cousins, old family friends, all of them telling Lauren how proud they were of her. What a good daughter she was, how loyalty like that doesn't come around often. I didn't comment. I didn't call her. I lay there for a long time with the phone dark on my chest, listening to Tom breathe, thinking about how a story, once it's been said in a room full of applauding people, doesn't stay in that room. It goes home with everybody. It gets typed into phones and liked by 40 people who will now, for the rest of their lives, tell this version at Christmas. I want to be fair to Lauren here because it would be easy to make her the villain of this part of the story. And she wasn't. She genuinely believed what she'd written. Nobody had told her otherwise. As far as she knew, our parents had saved that house through Dad's frugality and her own emotional support during a hard year, and she was allowed to be proud of that. Her sin, if you want to call it one, was not malice. It was simply never asking a follow-up question. But lying in bed that night, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel at the party. Not hurt exactly, something colder than that. I got up quietly so I wouldn't wake Tom, and I went downstairs and opened my laptop at the kitchen table. I didn't look at the post again. I logged into my bank's online portal instead, for the first time in almost 2 years, and pulled up the transaction history from that March. There it was. One line, unglamorous, unremarkable to anyone who didn't know what it meant. A wire transfer, $61,400, to a mortgage servicing company whose name meant nothing to anyone but me and, I assumed, my father. I didn't know yet what I was going to do with it. I just knew, sitting there at 1 a.m. with the refrigerator humming behind me, that for the first time in 2 years, I wanted the proof in front of me. Not to show anyone, just to hold. I told myself for weeks that I only wanted the payoff statement for my tax preparer, a completely reasonable, boring request, the kind you make without a second thought. I called the mortgage servicer on a Thursday morning during my lunch break, sitting in my car in the clinic parking lot because the office doesn't have great cell reception. I gave the representative the property address, my name, and asked for a copy of the payoff statement from 2 years back. There was a pause on the line, the kind that tells you something before anyone says a word. "I'm showing a note on this account," the representative said, sounding a little apologetic. "There's a restriction requesting that documentation not be released except directly to the primary account holder. That would be a Frank Kessler. I can have him request it, or if you're a joint payee, I'd need to verify that separately." "I'm not a joint payee," I said. "I made the payment. I wired it directly." "I understand, ma'am, but the account holder specifically called in, twice actually, asking that no documents go out to anyone but him." I sat in my car for a long moment after I hung up, the engine off, the parking lot quiet except for someone's radio playing faintly from the building next door. I want to describe what that felt like, because it wasn't the hurt from the party, and it wasn't the cold ache from Lauren's post. This was different. This was a chill, slow and specific, working its way up the back of my neck. Forgetting to mention something is one thing. My father not thinking to correct the story at a party, not wanting to make a scene, avoiding an awkward conversation. I could have lived with that version of events. I'd been living with it, actually for 2 years. But calling a bank, twice, specifically asking that paperwork with my name on it not be sent to me. That wasn't an oversight. That was a decision. Somebody had wanted that paper trail to stay buried, and sitting there in my car, I realized I already knew exactly who. I thought back, without meaning to the night I made the wire transfer. My father on the phone, his voice cracking when he told me about the storage development, about the friend from Rotary, about how ashamed he was. I remembered thinking at the time that his shame was about the money. I was starting to understand it might have been about something else, something closer to pride than guilt. I drove back to the clinic that afternoon and finished my patients like nothing had happened, because that's what I do, apparently, even to myself. But that night, I told Tom about the phone call, sitting at the kitchen table with the dinner dishes still out. "You need to talk to him," Tom said. Not a suggestion. A fact, laid down gently, the way he lays most things down. "I know," I said. "Not your mom. Him." Directly. I know, I said again, and I meant it. I just didn't know yet how much that conversation was going to cost me. I drove out to my parents' place on a Saturday morning under the excuse of returning a socket wrench set I'd borrowed months earlier, and never quite gotten around to bringing back. My mother was at a hair appointment. It was just my father, out in the garage, sanding down an old porch chair he'd been meaning to refinish since before I was born, probably. I set the wrenches on his workbench and stood there for a second, working up to it, the way you work up to jumping into cold water. "Dad," I said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to actually answer me." He didn't stop sanding. "Okay. Where did the mortgage payoff come from? The story at the party. Where did Mom get that from?" His hand went still on the sandpaper. He didn't turn around right away. When he did, he looked older than I'd seen him look in years. Not physically, but around the eyes, like something behind his face had given out. "I told her it came from savings," he said. "Money I'd put aside. Being careful over the years." "Dad, you called the bank. Twice. Asking them not to send me my own documents." He set the sandpaper down on the workbench, very carefully, the way you set down something you're afraid of dropping. "I couldn't tell her the truth, Rachel. I couldn't tell her I almost lost her father's house because I trusted a man from Rotary with our retirement money. I couldn't tell her that our daughter had to bail us out. Do you understand what that would have done to me? To how she sees me? So instead you let her believe Lauren did it." "I never said Lauren did it," he said, and for a second there was something almost defensive in his voice, before it collapsed back into shame. I let the story sit where it landed. Lauren was there for us that year. She called every day. She drove up on weekends. It wasn't a lie exactly. It was just incomplete. "It's been 2 years, Dad." He didn't answer that. He looked down at the chair, at the half-sanded armrest, at anything that wasn't my face. "I was going to tell her eventually," he said. "I just kept waiting for the right time. I want to tell you I yelled at him. I didn't. I stood in that garage, surrounded by the smell of sawdust and motor oil, and I felt something crack quietly open in my chest, not from what he'd done exactly, but from understanding for the first time that he'd known. The whole time. Every single time my mother said, "That's just Rachel." Every time Lauren posted a photo of a key that should have had my name on it too, my father had been standing right there with the truth in his pocket, choosing again and again not to take it out. "Don't tell your mother," he said quietly, and it was such an exact echo of the text message on my phone that I actually laughed, one short, ugly sound with no humor in it at all. "Not yet. Let me find the right way." And for the second time in 2 years, I said okay. I didn't know it yet, driving home with the socket wrenches still sitting on his workbench, forgotten. But that was the last time I was ever going to say okay to that particular request. Here's a hard thing to admit. Even after the garage, even knowing what I knew, I still wanted to believe it could be fixed quietly. I called my father 4 days later and told him plainly that I wasn't asking him to humiliate himself or blow up his marriage. I just wanted him to tell Diane the truth, gently, in his own time, in his own way. I told him I would never bring it up myself if he did that one thing. He agreed. Relieved, almost, the way people sound when a decision has finally been made for them, even a hard one. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. And I mean that in the good way at first. Sunday dinner came and went, ordinary, easy. My mother asking Sophie about her spelling test, and Frank grilling burgers on the back deck, like a man with nothing on his mind. Nana Ruth was there too, 90 pounds of sharp opinions wrapped in a cardigan, watching the table over her reading glasses the way she always did, like she was keeping score on something the rest of us didn't know we were playing. At one point, apropos of nothing, while passing the potato salad, she said, "Funny how the story changes depending on who's telling it." Nobody responded. My mother laughed it off. "Oh, Ruth." And the conversation moved on to something about Ben's soccer schedule. I remember thinking it was just Ruth being Ruth, dropping one of her cryptic little lines into the middle of dinner like a seed she wasn't in a hurry to see grow. I didn't think about it again for weeks. I let myself relax a little during those 14 days. I told Marissa at the clinic that I thought things might actually work out. He's going to tell her, I said, refilling my coffee in the break room. Quietly. No big scene. Marissa gave me a look I didn't love. You believe that? I want to believe it. Those aren't the same thing, Rach. I didn't have a good answer for her, so I changed the subject, the way I usually did when someone got too close to something true. For 2 weeks, I let myself believe the hardest part was already behind me. I was wrong about which part was hardest. It was Lauren who broke it, without meaning to, the way she always seemed to end up delivering the worst news accidentally, in the middle of some other conversation entirely. She called me on a Tuesday to ask if I could recommend a pediatric dentist for her youngest, and near the end of the call, almost as an afterthought, she said, "Oh, and hey, Mom and Dad and I have an appointment at the county office next Thursday to get the deed transfer actually recorded. Dad said it's basically just a formality at this point, but it feels official, you know? Like it's really mine now." I remember standing in my kitchen, phone against my ear, watching Ben do homework at the table, and feeling the floor tilt slightly under me. "That's great," I said, because what else do you say? "That's exciting." I got off the phone a few minutes later and sat down across from Ben, staring at nothing, until he asked if I was okay, and I told him I was fine on autopilot, the family motto doing its work even on an 11-year-old. My father had not told my mother anything. 2 weeks of quiet Sunday dinners, 2 weeks of me protecting his timeline, and he was about to let the county of Buncombe make it official and permanent. A legal document with Lauren's name on a house I'd paid to save, built entirely on a story that had never been true. I called Tom at work, which I almost never do, and told him what was happening. He was quiet on the line for a second. "Rach," he said, "you know I've kept copies of every transfer you've made to your parents for the last 6 years, right? Every single one. I've got them in a folder dated with the bank confirmations." "Why would you do that?" "Because I figured someday you might need them," he said. "And I figured you'd never ask for them yourself." I sat with that for a long moment. My husband had spent 6 years quietly preparing for a fight I didn't even know I was going to need to have. I hung up the phone and realized I no longer had the luxury of waiting for my father to find his courage. The clock had a date on it now, next Thursday, and courage on my father's timeline had already proven, twice, that it ran out before it arrived. I decided to try the gentle way one more time. "I want you to understand that this wasn't weakness. I've thought about it a lot since, and I've decided it was actually the bravest version of me. The version who tried honesty before evidence, who gave her family every reasonable chance to do the right thing without being forced into it. I asked my parents if I could come by for dinner, just the 4 of us, me, Tom, Mom, and Dad. No party, no crowd, no audience. My father knew what was coming, I think, from the careful way he avoided my eyes when we walked in. We got through most of the meal on small talk. Then, over decaf, I set my fork down and said, as calmly as I've ever said anything in my life, "I need to talk about the lake house. About where the payoff money actually came from." My mother's face did something I'll never forget. A kind of flinch, quick and small, like she'd anticipated the sentence before I finished it and was already bracing against it. And then, before I could say another word, she held up a hand. "Please don't do this," she said. "Don't make Lauren's gift about you. You're always fine, Rachel. Can't you just be happy for your sister for once?" For once. I sat there with that word ringing in my ears. For once. As if in 41 years I had never once needed anything from my mother. As if every quiet transfer, every unspoken sacrifice, every time I'd absorbed a hard thing so nobody else had to, had simply confirmed what she already believed. That I didn't need tending to. That I was the load-bearing wall, not a room anyone had to decorate. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I said, "Okay." And I helped clear the plates, and Tom and I drove home in near silence, the radio low, the mountains dark on either side of the road. I drove home that night, knowing the next conversation about that house wouldn't be quiet. It couldn't be anymore. I had tried the gentle version, twice now, once with my father in the garage, once with both of them at that table, and both times the truth had been offered and declined. Not out of cruelty. Out of a desperate, practiced preference for the comfortable story over the real one. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in the dark thinking about the folder Tom had been keeping for 6 years, and the bank statement I could request myself if I had to, and the text message still sitting, unanswered in every way that mattered, in a 2-year-old conversation thread on my phone. Nana Ruth's 89th birthday landed 3 weeks later, and it was smaller than my mother's had been. Just family, a lunch at Ruth's kitchen table instead of a rented hall, the kind of gathering where nobody bothers with a microphone. Somewhere between the pot roast and the cake, my mother raised her glass, the way she liked to do at these things, and said, "To family." And to Lauren, who saved the lake house when it mattered most. I felt my whole body go still, the way you go still when you've heard something so many times it should have stopped hurting and somehow hasn't. And then Nana Ruth, who had said almost nothing all afternoon, set down her fork. "Why don't you tell your mother what really happened, honey?" she said, looking directly at me, her voice cutting cleanly through the table's noise the way only a very old person's voice can, unhurried, unbothered by what it might disturb. "You've carried this long enough." The table went silent. My mother turned toward Ruth, confused, a small, uncertain smile still frozen on her face like she was waiting for the joke to land. My father set his fork down very slowly. "Ruth," my mother said, half laughing, "what are you talking about?" Ruth didn't answer her. She just looked at me, steady, the same way she'd looked at me across a recipe box in her kitchen 25 years earlier, when I was 16 and crying about something I don't even remember anymore. And she'd told me a sentence I'd carried in my chest ever since without fully understanding why. "You don't have to earn a family, Rachel girl. Not even this one. I hadn't planned to do this today. I want to be honest about that. I'd imagined the conversation happening on my terms, at a time I chose, with words I'd rehearsed in the shower. But some doors, once someone else opens them for you, don't let you close them again. And Ruth had just opened mine, in front of the entire family, with the calm authority of a woman who had clearly been waiting years for someone else to do it, and had finally decided she wasn't going to wait anymore. I looked at my mother. I looked at my father, who wouldn't look back at me. I thought about the folder Tom had brought with him, sitting untouched in his bag by the door because some instinct, call it hope, call it habit, had made me ask him to bring it along, just in case, without either of us saying out loud what in case meant. "Okay," I said. "Let's talk about it." I didn't raise my voice. I want that understood, because I think it mattered more than anything else I did that afternoon. I asked Tom to bring in the folder. I laid 3 things on Ruth's kitchen table, one at a time, the way you'd lay down cards you'd been holding for a very long time. The first was my bank statement from 2 years earlier. One line, highlighted in yellow, showing a wire transfer of $61,400 to a mortgage servicing company on a date everyone at that table already recognized, because it was the same date on the framed photo hanging in my parents' hallway. The day we paid off the lake house. "That's my transfer," I said. "Not Dad's savings. Mine." My mother stared at the paper like it was written in a language she almost understood. "Frank," she said slowly, "what is she talking about?" I laid down the second thing before he could answer, because I could see him reaching for another version of the same old sentence, and I didn't have it in me to hear it again. It was my phone, the text message pulled up on the screen, 2 years old, still sitting exactly where it had always been. "Don't tell your mother about this. I'll explain it my way. He asked me not to tell you." I said, my voice even, quiet, not unkind. 2 years ago when I paid it, and again 3 weeks ago when I gave him the chance to tell you himself. He asked me both times. And both times I said okay because I thought I was protecting this family. I understand now I was just protecting him. My mother read the text twice. I watched her face do something I'll remember for the rest of my life. The slow, physical collapse of a story she'd been proud of for 2 years, replaced by nothing yet, just the raw shape of a question she hadn't let herself ask before. She turned to my father. 2 years, she said. Not a question. A number laid bare. Diane, he started. 2 years, Frank. I set the third thing on the table, though by then it barely mattered. Tom's folder, 6 years of transfers, dates and confirmations, quiet proof of a pattern nobody in that family had ever fully seen at once. My mother's anger, when it finally came, wasn't aimed at me the way I'd braced for. It came out sideways toward Frank, sharp and small and devastated. "You let me stand up at my own birthday and thank the wrong daughter." "I didn't mean," he said. "I don't care what you meant," she said, and then quieter to me in a voice I'd genuinely never heard from her before. "Rachel, why didn't you just tell me?" I looked at my mother, really looked at her, this woman who had spent 30 years handing out affection according to a set of rules she didn't even know she was following. And I said the thing I'd been carrying since I was 16 years old, since long before the mortgage, since long before any of this. "Because you have a line ready for it," I said. "Rachel helps everyone with everything. That's just Rachel." "That's not a compliment, Mom. That's how you've explained away 30 years of me." Nobody spoke for a moment. Lauren across the table had gone pale, her hand pressed flat against her mouth, looking at the bank statement like it belonged to a different story than the one she'd been living inside. "I didn't know," she said to no one, to everyone. "Rachel, I swear to God I didn't know." "I know you didn't," I said, and I meant it, and something in my chest loosened just slightly saying it. My father was staring at the table, at the wire confirmation, at the text message still glowing on my phone between us, at the wreck of a story he'd spent 2 years protecting instead of protecting his family. I said the last thing I'd come to say, and I said it plainly, the way you'd state a fact instead of throw a stone. "I didn't need the house, Mom. I needed you to know it was me. You can still be proud of Lauren. Just not for this. I want to be honest with you about what happened next, because it wasn't clean, and it wasn't fast. And if you're expecting a scene where everyone hugs and cries and the credits roll, that's not quite what this was." The deed appointment at the county office got canceled that same week. My mother, I found out later, was the one who made the call, not my father. Something in her had shifted hard enough to take charge of the one piece of the story she could still control. Lauren called me 2 days after Ruth's lunch, her voice thick, asking if she could come by and actually see the documents herself. Not because she doubted me, she said, but because she needed to hold them, needed to understand it in her own hands instead of secondhand across a kitchen table. She sat at my counter for an hour reading through Tom's folder, and near the end of it, she looked up at me and said, "I posted that key online like it was mine to be proud of." God, Rachel. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The family worked it out, eventually, with Nana Ruth doing more of the quiet mediating than anyone gave her credit for. The house would stay jointly held, Lauren and me together, instead of a single name on a deed built on somebody else's silence. Lauren wanted to give up her share entirely at first, out of guilt, and I told her no. She loved that place too. She just deserved to love it honestly. My father and I didn't have a big reconciliation scene. We had several small, uncomfortable conversations over the following weeks, most of them shorter than I would have liked, some of them just him standing in his garage saying, "I know I hurt you," in a voice that finally sounded like he meant the years, not just the moment. It wasn't revenge, watching him sit with that. It was just, finally, the correct version of events sitting where it should have been all along. And it turned out that was enough, even though enough didn't feel like triumph. It felt more like exhaustion, the good kind, the kind that comes after finally putting down something heavy. My mother called me more in the month after that lunch than she had in the previous year combined. Small calls. Awkward ones, some of them. The kind where you can hear someone trying to learn a new habit in real time. "How's the clinic?" she'd ask, and then haltingly, "How are you, actually?" "Not fine. Actually." I didn't have a perfect answer for her the first few times. I'm still learning how to give one. Weeks later, my parents started going to counseling, which is a sentence I never in my life expected to say about my father, a man who once described therapy as paying someone to agree with your wife. He went anyway. He's still going. Lauren posted something new online, quiet, no fanfare, nothing like the first one. Just a photo of the two of us sitting on the dock at the lake house, arms around each other, squinting into the sun. "This place is standing because of my sister," the caption read. I didn't know. Now I do. I saw it late one night, scrolling the way I had 2 years before, and I noticed something different this time. It didn't ache the way the first one had. That's how I knew something had actually changed, not because the world looked different, but because I did. That same weekend, I was at Nana Ruth's house helping her put dishes away, and we ended up in front of her old recipe box. The one that sat on her kitchen counter my entire life, full of index cards and handwriting from 3 generations. Tucked inside, near the back, was the note she'd written me when I was 16. The one I'd found months earlier while helping her clean. The one I'd carried folded in my wallet through every hard conversation of the last 2 years without telling a single person I had it. You don't have to earn a family, Rachel girl. Not even this one. I read it one more time, standing in her kitchen with a dish towel over my shoulder, and then I folded a new piece of paper and tucked it in right beneath the old one. A note of my own, for my daughter someday, whenever she's old enough to need it the way I needed Ruth's. I didn't write it because I'd figured everything out. I wrote it because I finally understood what I wanted her to know before she spent 30 years learning it the hard way. The way I did. Later that evening, Tom found me on the porch. The kids were inside watching something loud on TV, and the lake was doing that thing it does at dusk where the water goes the same color as the sky. "You okay?" he asked, the same 2 words he'd said to me under a party table 2 years earlier. "Yeah," I said, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I meant it without having to convince myself of it first. "I don't feel like I have to prove anything to get into that house anymore." He didn't say anything clever back. He just sat down next to me, and we watched the light change over the water. I already had a key to that house, it turns out. I always had. I just spent 2 years waiting for somebody else to hand it to me before I understood that. I stopped waiting to be seen and started simply being known.